So you want to run an executioner's business in 16th century Nuremberg. You probably picture a hulking, hooded figure standing silently on a wooden scaffold, cold steel in hand, blood on the cobbles. A terrifying, miserable outcast surviving on breadcrumbs in an isolated shack outside the city gates. One single line from a 1578 municipal ledger ruins that picture completely. In the spring of 1578, a master carpenter in Nuremberg earned roughly 20 kreuzer for a day of back-breaking labor. In that exact same week, the city council authorized a payment to their newly hired executioner for a single morning's work. His fee was 6 florins, that is 360 kreuzer. In less than 30 minutes on the scaffold, he earned more than 9 weeks of a skilled craftsman's hard labor. You thought you were looking at a butcher's scaffold. What you were really looking at was a closed-loop municipal monopoly. Over the course of this video, we are going to reconstruct the actual financial ledger of the Holy Roman Empire's most untouchable civil servant. We will break down the municipal retainers, the exclusive municipal sanitation concessions, and the booming black market trade in gallows medicine that turned public execution into one of the most profitable private enterprises in early modern Europe. To understand how this business functioned, you first have to understand the legal mechanism that created it. Early modern Europe was governed by an invisible, rigid social currency called Ehrlichkeit, civic honor. Honor was not just a moral concept, it was an economic prerequisite. If you had civic honor, you could join a guild. You could buy property inside the city walls. You could sue in court. You could drink in the public taverns. If you lost your honor, you became unehrlich, dishonorable. You were branded an outcast. By imperial decree, the executioner was legally declared dishonorable the moment he touched the gallows. He was forced to wear specific clothing so citizens could avoid him. He had to live outside the city walls. In public taverns, he had to drink from a dedicated wooden cup so his lips would not touch a glass meant for honorable men. If he touched a merchant's goods at the market, he was legally required to buy them because no honorable citizen would touch what he had defiled. That sounds like a death sentence for a business. It was actually the ultimate competitive barrier. Because the job carried total social death, nobody wanted it. No honorable citizen could take the blade without ruining his entire family for generations. That meant the city council had a massive problem. They needed executions to maintain public order, but nobody in the civic population was legally allowed to perform them. So the city had to pay a premium. The legal burden of dishonor created an absolute labor scarcity, and scarcity creates pricing power. The city council of Nuremberg could not hire a random laborer off the street. They had to offer a lucrative contract enough to compensate a man for losing his place in human society. What resulted was a closed, hereditary monopoly. The trade was passed down directly from father to son or through marriage to an executioner's daughter. No outside competitor could ever undercut your prices. No guild could open a rival shop down the street. The state had effectively handed one family a total monopoly on lawful violence. According to surviving Nuremberg municipal payroll ledgers, known as the Ratsverlassbücher, the foundation of this business was a guaranteed base retainer. The executioner was not just a gig worker paid per head, he was a salaried municipal official. In Nuremberg during the late 16th century, the master executioner received a fixed weekly salary of 2 to 3 florins regardless of whether he executed anyone that week. To put that figure in context, 2 florins a week amounted to over 100 florins a year, a stable income that matched or exceeded the annual earnings of a master mason or civic clerk. And that was just the base package. The city also provided free housing. In Nuremberg, the executioner was given the Henkerturm, the executioner's tower, a massive fortified residence built directly over the Pegnitz River. The city paid for the maintenance of the structure. They provided free firewood. They covered his municipal water access. They even provided tax exemptions on basic food imports for his household.
The fixed retainer kept the business solvent during quiet months, but the real profit margins came from the piece rate fees for individual judicial acts.
Every single action performed by the executioner had a specific price tag itemized in the municipal code. A standard beheading by the sword yielded a fee of 3 to 6 florins. A hanging brought in 2 to 4 florins. Flogging a convict out of town paid 1 florin. Branding a thief on the cheek paid 1 florin. Even the preparation of torture devices in the subterranean chambers beneath the Nuremberg town hall carried individual billable hours paid directly by the city treasury. Consider what happens on a busy judicial day. If the Nuremberg court sentenced 3 highwaymen to death, 1 to be beheaded, 2 to be hanged, and ordered 2 minor thieves to be flogged and banished, the executioner's invoice for that single morning would reach roughly 15 florins. That single morning's invoice equaled roughly 5 months of wages for a skilled carpenter. Blood paid well, but the contract did not stop at the edge of the scaffold. The executioner held another legal privilege, known as spolienrecht, the right of spoliation. Under spolienrecht, every piece of clothing, every piece of jewelry, and every personal item worn by the condemned convict at the moment of execution became the legal property of the executioner. If a wealthy murderer walked onto the scaffold wearing a high-quality wool coat, fine leather boots, and a silver belt buckle, those items did not go to the victim's family, nor did they revert to the state. They were stripped from the corpse and placed directly into the executioner's inventory. He could sell these clothes at second-hand markets outside the city, or retailer them through shady brokers who dealt with outcast populations. A single fine doublet stripped from a wealthy criminal could be resold for 2 or 3 florins, doubling the profit of the execution itself. Yet, even with high fees and free clothes, executions were fundamentally unpredictable. Crime rates fluctuated, judges issued pardons. A city might go weeks or months without a single death sentence. A business relying entirely on the scaffold would suffer volatile cash flows. So the state granted the executioner a second, far more reliable revenue stream. They made him the head of public sanitation. In early modern Europe, the executioner held the exclusive monopoly over the Abdeckerei, the civic skinning yards. Because dead animals were considered ritually unclean, honorable citizens were forbidden from touching horse carcasses, stray dog bodies, or livestock that died of disease in the city streets. If a draft horse collapsed and died on Nuremberg's main cobblestone thoroughfare, the owner could not clean it up himself. If he tried, he risked losing his civic honor. He had to call the municipal executioner. The executioner, or his assistants, known as knecht, would haul the carcass out of the city to the skinning yard next to his residence. This was not a public service he performed out of civic duty. It was a fee-based utility with built-in product harvesting. First, the owner of the dead animal had to pay the executioner a mandatory removal fee, typically 10 to 15 kreuzer per large animal. Next, the executioner stripped the carcass. He preserved the hide and sold it directly to tanneries. He rendered the animal fat into industrial tallow, which was sold to soap makers and candle manufacturers. He processed the bones for glue factories and sold the remaining meat to dog breeders or used it to feed the city's hound kennels. Nothing was wasted. A single dead horse yielded a removal fee, a high-value leather hide, and several pounds of industrial grease. In a city like 16th century Nuremberg, with thousands of horses, oxen, and livestock passing through the gates every month, animal mortality was constant. While executions happened a few dozen times a year, the Abdeckerei operated every single day. It provided a steady, predictable baseline of daily operational cash flow that paid the wages of the executioner's hired hands and covered his daily living expenses. The skinning yard was dirty, nauseating work, but economically it functioned as a guaranteed municipal sanitation monopoly. And yet, neither the city retainer nor the skinning yard represented the highest profit margin in the business. That distinction belonged to a market operating entirely in the shadows of early modern medicine. To understand this side of the ledger, you have to understand how people in the 16th century viewed the human body. Medical theory at the time was dominated by vitalist beliefs. It was widely believed that a person who died suddenly at the height of health, such as a young criminal executed on the scaffold, retained a powerful, unspent vital force within their blood, fat, and bones. This belief created a massive demand for what was known as gallows medicine, or materia medica harvested from executed criminals, and there was only one legal supplier in the entire territory: the executioner.
Because the executioner controlled the corpse, he controlled the supply chain for the most sought-after medical ingredients in early modern Europe. Consider human fat, known in German pharmacy records as Armenschmalz, poor sinner's fat. It was prized by physicians, apothecaries, and ordinary citizens as a miraculous cure for arthritis, joint pain, nerve damage, and deep wounds. After an execution, the hangman would take the body to his private quarters, render the fat from the corpse, and boil it down into refined medical ointments. A single small jar of refined human fat could sell for 2 to 5 florins on the black market. To put that figure in perspective, one small jar of this ointment cost almost a full month's wages for a journeyman mason. A single corpse could yield several pounds of fat, generating decades of profit from a single morning's labor on the scaffold. Then came the blood. Epileptics and people suffering from severe neurological disorders believed that drinking the fresh, warm blood of a recently beheaded convict would cure their seizures. At public executions, sick individuals would stand at the base of the scaffold holding wooden cups, paying the executioner hard cash for a cup of steaming blood caught directly from the severed neck of the criminal. Then came the hardware of death. The rope used to hang a thief was believed to bring extraordinary good luck, cure fevers, and grant protection from enemies. The executioner would cut the hanging rope into small inch-long segments and sell them to superstitious crowds for 10 to 20 kreuzer apiece. Skulls were sold to alchemists and physicians to be ground into powder for epilepsy treatments. Moss grown on the skulls of unburied criminals hung in gibbets, known as usnia, was harvested and sold at absurdly inflated prices as a blood-clotting agent. Apothecaries bought these products under the table, processed them, and sold them in city pharmacies under Latin names like Acsungia hominis. The elite bought them, the poor saved their copper coins for them, and every single coin spent on these remedies went directly into the leather purse of the man holding the sword. This hidden supply chain turned the executioner into an unofficial, highly wealthy apothecary.
We know these details with remarkable precision because of one specific, extraordinary historical document. That document is Master Franz Schmidt in Nuremberg Allseinverzeichnis, the personal logbook and execution journal of Master Franz Schmidt, who served as the public executioner of Nuremberg from 1578 to 1617. Franz Schmidt's journal is the ultimate primary source anchor for early modern judicial economics. Over his 44-year career, Schmidt recorded 361 individual executions and hundreds of corporal punishments, meticulously writing down the name of the criminal, their crime, the method of punishment, and the location. Schmidt's life reveals the immense psychological trauma and financial reality of this brutal trade. His family did not choose this business. In 1553, the notoriously cruel Margrave of Brandenburg-Kulmbach ordered 3 men to be hanged in the town of Hof. Wanting to humiliate the local populace, the Margrave picked an innocent woodcutter named Heinrich Schmidt out of the crowd and forced him at gunpoint to perform the hangings. The moment Heinrich Schmidt's hands touched that rope, his civic honor was destroyed. He was instantly banished from his community, declared dishonorable, and forced to become a professional executioner to feed his family. His son, Franz Schmidt, was born into that inherited curse. Young Franz was trained by his father in the family business, learning the precise mechanics of anatomy, knot tying, sword swinging, and bone setting. When Franz arrived in Nuremberg in 1578 to take over the city's executioner contract, he brought a hyper-professional, almost corporate approach to the role. Franz recognized that his business depended entirely on execution accuracy. Executing a person with a sword is extraordinarily difficult. If the executioner swung wildly, missed the neck, or required multiple strikes to sever the head, the crowd would become enraged. Riots frequently broke out at bad executions. Crowds would throw stones at the executioner, beat him, or even tear him to pieces on the scaffold if he botched the job. To mitigate this operational risk, Franz practiced relentlessly on animal carcasses. He maintained his steel swords with extreme care. During his entire 44-year career in Nuremberg, executing over 300 people with the sword, he almost never missed. He transformed a messy, violent act into a clean, predictable, professional service. More importantly, Franz Schmidt used his access to human anatomy to build a massive secondary business that eclipsed his judicial work. He became a master surgeon and physician. Because executioners were routinely called upon to torture suspects, using rack stretchers, thumbscrews, and strappado hoists to extract confessions, they developed an intimate, practical knowledge of human joints, bones, and musculature. They knew exactly how much pressure a joint could take before dislocating, and more importantly, how to pop it back into place. Franz Schmidt converted that torture expertise into a legitimate medical practice. He established a surgery consulting room at his residence in the Henkerturm. Ordinary citizens who were terrified of being seen near him in broad daylight would sneak across the bridge at dusk to have him set broken bones, pop dislocated shoulders back into place, or treat chronic ulcers. According to his journal and contemporary city records, Master Franz treated thousands of patients during his tenure in Nuremberg. By the late 16th century, Master Franz was earning more money from setting bones and selling ointments than he was from executing criminals. He became one of the wealthiest men living outside the city walls. But money was never his ultimate goal. His entire financial strategy was designed for one thing: buying back his family's lost civic honor.
In a good year, the net profit reached 330 florins, making the executioner wealthier than most city jurists, merchants, and guildmasters. The money was staggering, but the ultimate economic challenge was what to do with it. If you were a normal merchant in Nuremberg, you took your profits and invested them back into the city. You bought a grand house on the main market square. You invested in merchant shipping fleets. You funded civic art. You married your daughter into a wealthy patrician family. An executioner could do none of those things directly. He was legally barred from buying real estate inside the city walls. He could not invest in town guilds. His children could not marry into honorable families. If he held his money in liquid silver coins under his floorboards, it did him no good. Cash sitting idle in a chest is vulnerable to theft, inflation, and political confiscation. This brings us to the crucial question: who actually got rich from this trade, and how did they convert blood money into generational wealth? The smartest master executioners used their massive liquid cash reserves to launch a sophisticated shadow asset conversion strategy. Because executioners were among the few individuals in early modern Europe who held large amounts of liquid cash unencumbered by guild dues or civic taxes, they became informal, off-the-books moneylenders. Who were their clients? The very aristocracy that shunned them. Needy noblemen, cash-strapped knights, and even municipal councils in smaller surrounding towns frequently found themselves in desperate need of immediate liquid cash to pay debts or finance military campaigns. They could not easily borrow from established merchant banks without collateral or public scrutiny, so they went quietly to the executioner's tower under cover of darkness. The executioner would lend them silver coins at substantial interest rates. Because the borrower was an honorable nobleman and the lender was a dishonorable hangman, the executioner demanded rock-solid collateral: land titles, rural estates, agricultural mortgages, and mill rights outside the city jurisdiction. If the nobleman defaulted on the loan, the executioner did not take the property in his own name. That was legally impossible. Instead, he placed the title in the name of an honorable strawman, or held the mortgage rights to collect the agricultural yield year after year. Franz Schmidt took this asset conversion strategy to its ultimate limit. Over his 44 years in Nuremberg, Schmidt saved thousands of florins. He bought rural property outside Nuremberg's jurisdiction through legal proxies. He built a massive private medical reputation that reached the highest levels of Franconian society. In 1617, at the age of 62, Master Franz Schmidt retired from his post as city executioner. He handed the heavy sword to his successor, but he refused to die an outcast. Franz Schmidt spent a portion of his accumulated fortune to hire elite legal representation. He drafted a personal petition directly to the Holy Roman Emperor in Vienna, Emperor Ferdinand II.
In his petition, Master Franz laid out his case with methodical precision. He cited his 44 years of flawless civic service to Nuremberg. He provided testimonials from doctors, jurists, and city councilors attesting to his extraordinary medical skill, his pious Christian character, and his immaculate professional conduct. He pointed out that his father had been forced into the trade illegally by a tyrannical warlord, making his family's original dishonor an unrighteous injustice. He asked the emperor for one thing: a full imperial restoration of civic honor, rehabilitation. It cost a massive sum in imperial filing fees, legal retainers, and diplomatic gratuities paid to imperial officials in Vienna, money that only decades of execution fees and medical trade could provide. In 1621, Emperor Ferdinand II officially granted the petition. By imperial decree, Franz Schmidt and his descendants were fully restored to civic honor. The curse of Unehrlichkeit was permanently erased. Franz Schmidt was declared an honorable citizen. His sons were allowed to learn honorable crafts and enter municipal service. His daughters were allowed to marry into respectable civic families. When Master Franz died in 1634 at the age of 79, he was not buried in a ditch beneath the gallows like an outcast. He was buried in St. Rochus Cemetery, one of the most prestigious burial grounds in Nuremberg, surrounded by the elaborate graves of the city's wealthy patrician elite. His carved stone epitaph stands there to this day. He had successfully converted 44 years of judicial blood money into permanent civic respectability for his descendants. The story of the medieval executioner reveals a profound truth about how economic systems operate under extreme constraints. We tend to look at historical professions through a simple lens of social prestige. We assume that status and wealth always moved together, that those at the top of the social hierarchy held all the money, and those at the very bottom lived in absolute poverty. The early modern execution yard proves that the reality was stranger. By forcing a worker to the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy, by stripping him of his civic honor, his legal rights, and his human standing, the early modern state accidentally created the conditions for a terrifyingly profitable business model. The stigma of dishonor acted as a bulletproof market barrier. It eliminated competition. It forced the city council to pay high, guaranteed retainers. It granted exclusive rights over city sanitation, and it handed one man a total monopoly on the lucrative dark supply chain of human fat, dried blood, and gallows medicine. The executioner was hated. He was feared. He was forced to drink from a wooden cup in public taverns and live in an isolated tower over the river. But every time the city council needed to enforce its laws, every time a dead horse blocked a cobbled street, and every time a sick citizen sought a magical cure, they had no choice but to pour silver coins into his purse. He was not a miserable pariah surviving on crumbs. He was an untouchable municipal contractor running a high-margin enterprise. You thought you were looking at a butcher's scaffold. What you were really looking at was a closed-loop municipal monopoly.